Welcome back to Inside City Hall. Over the last 20 years, many education reformers have strongly advocated for charter schools, publicly financed schools that are independently run and largely separate from a central school board. While supporters argue that the schools have helped reach students in some of the country's most impoverished neighborhoods, critics argue that the schools have had mixed success at best and focus too much on test scores. The debate has taken center stage here in New York, with the state Senate this week voting to raise the statewide cap on the number of charter schools from 200 to 460. Joining us to debate the merits of charter schools is a leading critic of them, Diane Ravitch, the author of The Death and Life of the Great American School System, and James Merrimam, the chief executive of the New York City Charter School Center. Thank you for joining us tonight. So Diane, I am going to begin with you. You wrote a book, The Death and Life of the Great American School System. You talked about how you were once a supporter of charter schools. Now you no longer are a supporter. Why did you change your mind?
Well, actually, in 1998, I went to testify in Albany to try to persuade legislators to adopt charter school legislation. And I belonged to various conservative think tanks that advocated very strongly for charters. And I wrote op-eds in probably the New York Post, the Daily News, the Washington Post, the New York Times, touting the advantages of charters. But my vision of charters was that they would serve the children at greatest need and that they would collaborate with public education. I didn't see charters as being competitors for students or organizations that would seek to replace public schools, which is what's happening now in New York City. Not everywhere, but in many places. But I'd say that the big thing that really changed me was seeing the results of the various studies that have come out. Charters have been compared to public schools, regular public schools, in the National Assessment of Educational Progress since 2003. So they've been compared in 03, 05, 07, and 09. And there has never been a significant advantage for charters, whether you look at black students, Hispanic students, low-income students, or students in cities. And what struck me was what struck many of the researchers, at least those who are not sort of like conservative ideologues, which is that there's a wide variety. You can find charters everywhere that are really excellent charters that are doing exactly what I would wish charters would do, which is to help the neediest kids and do a good job of it. But you can also find everywhere totally abysmal charters that should be put out of business and are not. And on average, charters don't produce better results. If you aggregate them, they don't produce better results than public schools. So I found myself wondering, why are we privatizing public education? Why are we deregulating the sector where there are people who are in it to make money? There are people in it who really don't know what they're doing. And it's a very risky experiment, I think.
James, your response, Diane mentions the results. There's been a lot said about the results, how they're somewhat mixed, and how in a number of studies, charter schools do no better than public schools.
Sure. Well, my response is that Diane is looking nationwide, and obviously we're at the New York City Charter School Center, and our concern is how charter schools are doing in New York City. And the answer unequivocally is that on average we have 2 studies that are showing charter schools are doing far better than public schools. 2 studies by noted researchers, one of them that Professor Ravitch has praised, a study by Dr. Raymond, that show one's controlling for demographics, so same students in essence, that charter schools are outperforming their public school counterparts. I have to say, Professor Ravitch laid out a litany of complaints about charters. You know, I could add to it. I could keep on going forever, because the fact is there are certainly just some people who are just never going to like charter schools until they look exactly like the public schools. But we make no apologies. Charter schools are outperforming their public school counterparts. We have 50,000 parents on waiting lists for charter schools, and they are moving the entire district forward. They are creating a model for how the district can move forward.
Diane.
Well, you know, he mentions the 2 studies that were done. One was done by a former colleague of mine at Hoover. Hoover is a very conservative think tank. Both of those scholars actually are fellows at the Hoover Institution, which is a very conservative, pro-choice think tank. Carolyn Hoxby, whom I have great respect for, because she's brilliant, will always come out with results that say any form of choice is better than a public institution. Margaret Raymond, Mackie Raymond, whom I like very much, her study said about New York City charters that about half of them get better reading scores as compared to the public schools. and about 29% get better math scores. Well, that means that public schools, 70% of them get better math scores and half get better reading scores. So I see this as almost a wash. And she also said in her study that the kids who are special ed and limited English proficient, the kids who've been held back a grade, get no benefit from charter schools. So it's certainly a mixed study. It does not paint a picture that says charter schools are the best way forward. What concerns me, I guess, with the great push for charters is that the charters now enroll 3% of the kids in the city, 3% of the public enrollment. And there's nobody advocating for the 97%. I know that Mayor Bloomberg is a great supporter of charters, Chancellor Klein is a great supporter of charters, and I'm wondering who in a way, the charter movement in New York City is like a repudiation of Mayor Bloomberg's claims about mayoral control. He tells the world that he has so totally reformed the public schools that everybody now wants to go to the public schools. But here you have 50,000 people saying, let us out of Mayor Bloomberg's public schools. So that's quite an indictment of his own record. But more importantly, I guess what concerns me is who's advocating for the 97%? Who's talking about really changing the system? And the system is being neglected while we focus on the 3% and perhaps doubling that number to 6%.
And James, Diane raises the point also that a lot of these public school or charter schools, it seems, there's the charge at least that they take the best students, leaving the special education students, lower performing students to remain in the public schools.
We've heard all of this, and the fact is there's just no data to show that's true. Let's just say so.
On average, what's the demographic of a charter school?
The demographics are the fact is that yes, we have lower special education and English language learner students, but there is absolutely no evidence to we take, quote, the best students. There's just no evidence for that. It's just a charge that's made over and over again, but repeating it doesn't make it more true. Professor Ravitch made, a number of claims. Who's advocating for the 97%? The fact is that the mayor and Chancellor Klein have been working for the school system. You may or may not agree with what they're doing, but the notion that somehow no one is working with those schools is absurd. The fact is, what parents care for is good schools, not charter schools or public schools. But overall, and Professor Ravitch knows this well and is cherry-picking the data, the fact is that overall, both studies show that charter schools, on average, are outperforming their district counterparts. It's as simple as that. That's the bottom line.
Well, of course, charter schools only enroll the students who apply, which means the families and the students who are dysfunctional or who are not motivated never even apply. Charter schools, according to the data that was in one of the recent studies that I cite in my book, enroll 111 homeless students. There are 50,000 homeless students in the city. There's a charter school in East New York that has great record and enrolls, it's within walking distance of 9 homeless shelters. There's not a single homeless student in that school. I guess the families don't know that there's a charter school. They're not motivated to apply. But that means that the regular public schools get a disproportionate number of students who are limited English proficient, students with disabilities, and students who are homeless. And that makes it harder for the public schools to succeed. I do think that it does raise a question. When you have a clamor for charter schools, what it means is there's a clamor to get out of the New York City public school system and into an independent school and to escape from a dysfunctional system. So that it does say something about nobody's minding the store. What the mayor and chancellor have been doing have been focusing on testing, testing, testing. And I think not only are charters over-tested, everybody's over-tested. I think that what everyone has been neglecting is the arts. We know that a third of our public schools don't even have an arts teacher. We've been neglecting science and history and foreign languages because they don't count. The only thing that counts is reading and math. I would like to see both the charters and the regular public schools freed of this burden of high-stakes testing.
Okay, hold your thoughts. We have to take a quick break. We'll have more on our debate about charter schools in just a moment, and later learn how you can comment on tonight's program. Stay with us.